does not get more crazy than that. Hi, Zizaran here with yet another 3.13 League starter, and this is a collab with another streamer called Nugiyen. He's making a Inquisitor Detonate Dead. Really strong, really solid. Inquisitor's gotten some really cool reworks that should have like really cool sustain, and it's a very easy build to switch into other builds if you don't like this build. Now, this is a skill with, it has two skills. It's going to be Desecrate and Detonate Dead. So if you're a player that don't like using multiple skills, this is probably not the build for you. Should be a very strong boss killer and obviously very solid for both hardcore and softcore. If you've never followed one of my build guides before, make sure that you check out the video in the description that like shows you a little bit about how we do the guides. If you're getting an error, it's because we're using the Path of Building community fork. And as per normal, we're doing step-by-step leveling trees to make sure you have an easy time knowing when to assign points at what level. Ascendancy points is in there as well. And for this build, the Bandits is a Lyra. We're a crit build, and the resist is really nice for League start. Obviously, we want crit multi, and mana regen is decent as well. Pantheon is Solaris and Gruthcoal. So here you can see the skills that you're leveling with, and there's loads of extra information in the notes here as well. And early on, you can use either Freezing Pulse or Rolling Magma. Pretty standard, you only need that for a few levels. You could also just use Stormblast Mine. At level 4, you get Orb of Storms. While inside Orb of Storms, if you're casting Stormblast Mine, it'll keep proccing the Orb of Storms explosion, so you get more damage. And you're going to be using this all the way until level 28. Movement skill early on is Frostblink, and then later on you swap to Flame Dash and Smoke Mine. If you don't like using Smoke Mine, feel free to just use Flame Dash here. Auras, Skitterbots, and Herald of Thunder. You could switch one of these out and use Vitality too for a big bunch of regen. If you're on softcore and you just want damage, just level a Vitality for later, but you definitely do want a leveled one. Once you get level 28, you switch to both Cremation and Armageddon Brand. Cremation is here your single target, so you just desecrate around the boss you're trying to kill, throw up the Cremation Geysers, and then you do like Flame Wall, Flammability, and Wave of Conviction for even more damage on it. Armageddon Brand you're using for clearing. We don't really need Brand Recall because it doesn't last that long, so just treat it like a normal spell and just run around throwing Armageddon Brand and stuff. And you're doing Ignite, Prolif, etc. So it'll feel really good. For your auras early on, you don't get to buy Skitterbot sadly on a Templar, but just do Herald of Thunder and Vitality. You don't necessarily need to use your Vitality early on, but make sure you level one because this is like a pretty core part of the build. At 28, when you are switching, you use Herald of Ash, Vitality, and you can also use Herald of Thunder. Will feel really nice for your clear. And the utility skills are here. You have Flammability, Flame Wall, Desecrate, Wave of Conviction. These aren't mandatory. You do need Desecrate for Cremation for doing damage to the boss. However, the other ones are just like added extra damage. If you don't like having a lot of hotkeys, then you can ditch them and do a lot less damage. Here we have some of the auras, and Vitality is a pretty big core of the build. Something that's really cool with Inquisitor and the Pious Path is that it just kind of doubles your regen. If you're getting 300 flat life regen from, for example, say Vitality, you're now getting 300 flat energy shield regen. And this is completely independent of what your actual energy shield value is. So it's nothing like percentage ES. It's just really strong. This means that if you're getting 2000 life regen, you're getting 2000 flat ES regen too. You can use Herald of Ash for extra clearing, but Vitality is really good for tank. You have Flesh and Stone to blind things around you, Skitterbots to chill and shock your enemies so they take more damage, and you want a Race Spectre. Now, the way we use Race Spectre in this build is because endgame we're Detonate Dead, and whenever you're desecrating something, it's choosing from the amount or from the different types of monsters that are already in the instance. But if you use a monster called a Crush Claw, you can see that that is 1200% corpse life, and the Blister Lord is 960. So these are some really tanky monsters in Path of Exile, and we can get them from Harvest. They're pretty much never gonna die, even on a 1-link Spectre, because they're so damn tanky. But if you're worried about losing them, I do have a video teaching you how to make a Spectre bank, which is very useful, and you can very easily do it with just a level 28 PvP character. Early on, if you can't find the Harvest monsters, then you can get the heist monsters from Repository and Tunnels listed here. So basically what this does is it, in your Desecrate pool of monsters that is choosing to like resurrect as corpses, it'll add these monsters to it so you do more damage with your Detonate Dead. It's a really cool mechanic that gives us a lot of damage. Here we have Enduring Cry with Second Wind, which is nice to get endurance charges on bosses, etc. We aren't insta-casting Enduring Cry, so if you feel it's too clunky and you don't want to deal with it for a little bit of extra survival, you can ditch it, but it is a nice source of endurance charges on bosses if you cast it. Flame Dash with Second Wind obviously feels really nice, recovers very quickly. So here is the cast and damage taken setup. The way this works is whenever you're used to Vigilant Strike yourself, you kind of want Ancestral Call on it. However, once you get a gem called, a unique jewel called the Vigil, you can use this with Vigilant Strike and General's Cry. Now you no longer use Ancestral Call anymore because you can't support minions with it. You can also do cast on damage taken and Feeble just to make bosses do a little bit less damage. Here we have another utility setup. This is a power charge on critical strike. You can use this with either Orb of Storms or Stormbrand. Both are really good, just some people have preferences on either. You also use Onslaught, so this would actually give you Onslaught on a boss, and you could also add Culling Strike. Here is your main 6-link setup. So we're using Vaal Detonate Dead here, and a really important thing to note for the Templar is that the Templar doesn't get Detonate Dead. That means that once you hit Act 6 and you're able to do the gem quest, you really want to buy 6 Detonate Dead gems. And pretty much use all your Vaal Orbs on them until you get at least 1 Vaal Detonate Dead. I would recommend leveling up 6 Detonate Dead in like your offhand until you have at least 1 Vaal Detonate Dead. Very important for the build because it's such a large chunk of damage. Here is your Trigger 1 setup, and the way this works is when you unveil weapons from Betrayal, they can give you trigger socketed spells, and it'll basically be whenever you do an action, it'll trigger them. And the reason we're using these gems, we have Cold Snap, which is going to chill things and also give them less action speed with that, but it'll also give you Frenzy charges, which is really nice. Purifying Flame is going to give Consecrated Ground, especially on things that are too far away for the one that we're generating under us. And Assassin's Mark is just going to be more base crit against the enemies we're attacking. Here we have our Desecrate, which is obviously mandatory. This is also how you're clearing or throwing a Desecrate, then detonating it. Now, builds like this can really struggle against porcupines. Whenever they're exploding with their like on death like quill mechanic thing, it can be really nice to just do an Infernal Cry on them and then kill them. It'll basically destroy the corpse and you never have to deal with the spikes. Let's look a little bit at some early gear. You basically can do the vendor recipe with a rare ruby ring, a blue wand, and a orb of alteration, and you make a pretty high level 21 like this. And then I would recommend don't augment the suffix, just craft a resist and then make 2 of these. Alternatively, if you find a wand with +1 fire gems early on, this is really good as well. Other than that, early on, it's basically just going to be getting life and resist on all the items. Doesn't really matter where you get the resists, just try to get resist capped as early as possible, ideally at least by Act 4. And remember that you lose resist in Act 5 Kitava and Act 10 Kitava. And make sure you make use of your crafting bench to craft resists on your gear. For Flasks, make sure you want to have freeze immunity, bleed immunity, and then curse immunity, but you only need that in maps. You do also want a bubbling or seething life flask as early as you can as well. Let's take a look a little bit at the endgame gear. Percentage fire damage is really strong here, and both fire damage or elemental damage is basically the same. However, spell damage is actually a worse stat because the corpse explosion part will not get scaled by spell damage. Cast speed is really nice for this build to feel good as well, and we're a crit build, so crit multi is really good. Now do remember that one of the things with Inquisitor is that we are using Inevitable Judgment. That means that flammability and things like that won't do anything because we are completely ignoring resists, whether it's advantageous or disadvantageous. Other than that, a lot of this build is going to be about hybrid gear, lots of life, and like you see this craft here, you unveil this from Gravitius in Betrayal, so specifically Gravitius items, and it's gain 10% of your max life as extra energy shield. So if you see here at our stats, when we have some, we have decent gear, we have a replica soul tether, we have 7.6k life, 4,000 energy shield, and then we have 1.5k ES regen, 1.5k life regen. Other than that, a lot of the gear is basically still going to just be focused around life and resists. And one quick note to note about this build. There is a stat on, for example, Elder Belts that's life recovery rate. Now it's very interesting to note this is still a good stat and will increase your life regen, but that life recovery rate does actually not translate to upgrading your energy shield recovery rate. So keep that in mind. And until you're able to get something like either a soul tether or a glorious vanity that has Doriani on it, which gives the same thing as a replica soul tether. It gives you corrupted soul. Having 1 or 2 pieces with a lot of energy shield on it to give yourself a decent amount of energy shield is pretty valuable because it's a big part of our defense. For anointments for this build, you can anoint very cheaply the Arsonist here, 24% fire damage and 1% regen, which is perfect for our build. And it's only green, and blue. For another really cheap anoint, you can get Diamond Skin, which gives you really nice resist early on, and it's kind of free. It's really nice. So I'm gonna do my normal questions for every build guide thing. Are there too many gems to equip? No, and it's very easy to drop, for example, things like Enduring Cry. You have a lot of utility things like that that you don't really need, especially on softcore, so you should be fairly easy to fit gems in this. Can the player have mana issues? Definitely could be a thing. The easiest case to solve mana on this build is going to be an Enduring Mana Flask, but you actually have a very big chance of being able to bypass this by getting the 70% mana if you've cast a spell recently, and maybe getting 1 piece with mana regen on it. You also might be able to run a low level Clarity to help with any mana issues in order to drop a mana flask. As far as useful leveling uniques, it's mostly going to be your normal sim stuff, but remember things like the Barrack Rings are insanely good. You obviously won't be able to at least start with them, but they're really great to pick up. It's Barrack's Respite, Barrack's Grip, Barrack's something else, but anyway, they're all called Barracks. They're really good, lots of spell damage. Other than that, wands, there's no unique weapon you ever want to use for spell builds. You always just want to get, for example, a wand with +1 of fire spell skill gems. And remember, this isn't just socketed gems, it's all the gems in the build, which is really good. Other than that, there will be things like Wanderlust, Cauldron, and a Tabula. Let's talk a little bit about the build's defense and sustain. Because you're getting such an insane amount of raw HP, you're actually fairly defensive against one-shots just by full raw HP. You also want to try to have Fortify from the Vigil, and then you have an insane amount of regen and sustain. So we're already using most of the auras that we want to. Herald of Ash is really nice for clearing. Things like Anger doesn't really benefit our build enough, and it's a 50% aura, so we're not going to use that. There's no really crazy mechanics that make this build work. It's pretty straightforward, but do remember that you are using 2 abilities to make this build work, and a lot of people like builds that you're only right-clicking. Using 2 abilities can take some getting used to. A really nice thing on this build, however, is that it's very easy to respec into other builds. One example is the Crackling Lance Ball Lightning build I'm doing. It's also very easy to switch between these 2 with not too many respec points. So if you don't end up liking one of them, it's fairly okay to switch to the other. There's also just a large amount of Inquisitor builds that are going to be pretty doable. Inquisitor sounds like a really solid ascendancy for this league. As far as financial hurdles, this build is gonna definitely have a lot of popular gear it's gonna be competing for on Trade League, because there's gonna be a large amount of people playing Necromancer, Detonate Dead as well. So a lot of fire damage gear is probably gonna be fairly expensive. But this is a completely doable build on solo self-fund. I hope you guys enjoyed this build guide. Thank you so much to Nugiyen for making it. He cited both Waggle and Pak, for example, as inspirations for the build. They've played similar things on Necromancer. Make sure you check out Nugi at twitch.tv/Nugi. Hope you guys have an amazing start to 3.13. Hope you get the best drops. Hope the build helps you. Sub if you like the video. But more importantly, try to die less than I do.